Time to head now to the National Party leader, Christopher Luxon, who joins us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Ryan. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back. Hey, congratulations on your poll numbers, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Look, I think it's encouraging, but we've got a lot of work to do still, as we've talked about before. But I think what it talks to is that New Zealanders are getting pretty frustrated with the government and a lack of delivery, to be honest.
And, well, the big thing you've been pushing is this cost of living, right? And the big driver of the cost of living crisis, you say, is housing. And you have made some big attacks and some big promises in this area. And I want to talk about those with you this morning. So let's start with renters, for example. 1.4 million Kiwis rent a house in this country. What do you think is an affordable amount of your income to be spending on rent?
Well, look, I mean, that's a debate and is actually a little bit about individual circumstances. What I can tell you is that, rent has gone up, $150 extra per week to rent the same house you had 4 years ago. And a lot of that is a function of, even if you just look in the last year, the government was advised, hey, listen, don't actually remove that, extend that bright line test, don't remove interest deductibility because it will lead to higher interest rates. That's what the Inland Revenue Department advised the government to do. And lo and behold, since those two measures have come in place, we've had another $50 added to weekly rent. But there are other things we should be doing, Ryan. We should be able to bring in developers that do
totally. I want to talk about
developments and stuff like that.
Totally. I want to talk about some of those things. But just coming back to the question, because there's a lot of people now who are looking at you as a potential Prime Minister. And these are people who perhaps were voting for the Labour Party, who are worried about their cost of living, and a good chunk of them are going to be renters. What's a reasonable percentage of your income to be spending on rent, do you think?
Well, look, a lot of people would say, look, it needs to be around, 35%, 40% living costs as a proportion of total income. But, the reality is that it is different by different circumstances in terms of how people manage their own finances.
Yeah.
What I can tell you is we've just got to keep working harder at all the aspects of housing, whether it's home ownership, rental, social housing or emergency housing. And we actually have to start getting solutions. And so, renters, I said there's lots of things that we can do in that space. I think, overseas you see, as I said, developers that actually come in and do build to rent.
Totally. And I do want to talk about those things. But just so that we're clear on where you're heading, you think that 35% of your income spent on rent would be a reasonable and an ideal place for you to be. That would be a target for you.
I'm just saying, when you've looked at historical banking sort of assessments, that's what people have sort of looked at. Anywhere from 30 to 40%, around the world sort of seems to be reasonable.
Yep. 40% is quite high. 25% of Kiwi households who rent spend 40% of their income on housing, and that is the second highest in the world, only behind the United Kingdom. That's considered quite high because you then have to, of course, account for everything else you need to pay for to feed your family and whatnot. So I'm just wondering...
Of course, and all those essentials are going up as well because the government's not managing inflation and it's letting inflation get a root in this economy, and it's really bad news.
OK. So how much cheaper would renting be under National?
Look, Ryan, I can't tell you that, but what I can tell you is we've got to work much harder at trying to get rent down. And it's about rental supply. It's about a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, but you've come out quite strongly, haven't you, on housing and particularly the cost of living. And you said that you can do a better job than Labour. So you're telling me you don't even know how much cheaper rent would be for people?
What I'm saying to you, Ryan, is that the essentials across New Zealand, whether it's power, food, rent, everything is going up. It's through the roof. And it's because the government has let inflation take root in this economy.
But you've announced policies, though, Chris. How much would those rents come down as a result of them?
Ryan, I can't tell you that. And I'm not.
Why not? Why not? Have you asked economists what impact your policies would have on rents?
All I'm saying to you, Ryan, is there's a number of things that we could be doing to improve rent, as there is a number of things we could be doing to improve home ownership, as there is a number of things that we should be doing to improve social and state housing as well.
Totally. I totally understand that. But I think, Chris, that people at home will be wanting to know quite specifically from you, because they've heard a lot from governments of all different colours. They'll be wanting to know quite specifically. So your interest deductibility rules, for example, how much would that shave off rents? Have you asked economists the question?
Well, what I can tell you is since those interest deductibility rules were taken, it was removed, since the bright line was extended from 2 years to 10 years, we've seen an increase in just 1 year of $50 per week on average rent.
So that would change. Rents would come down $50.
The officials gave the government the same advice. They said, look, if you do those things, it's going to lead to higher rents for renters. And, that's a challenge. So, I mean, that's the rationale for why we think if you remove those things, that's something that you can do in rents that, you've got to be we've got to have a whole series of actions that actually add up to make a difference. And those are two things that we think could certainly make a big difference.
Okay, so you're saying that get rid of those two things and rents will drop $50.
Well, they're one of the things, Ryan. There's a series of actions where there's not enough happening. You've actually got to be able to work each of the components of the housing crisis that we have. On rents, as I said, you'd work over the tax pieces because it's been those costs are just getting passed straight through to renters, and it's also leading to a lower level of supply of houses and rental properties. And then likewise, there's other things that you do. You could introduce things that help developers to come and actually build specific rental developments, which you see in other parts of the world that aren't here. On home ownership, there's a whole bunch of different things you do there around, actually around supply, consenting, the interface between central and local government, potentially, own to build, support programs for people to get their deposits, a whole bunch of things that we could be doing.
Yeah, I know there's a whole bunch of things we could be doing, but I'm talking about what you've announced you'll do already. And so far you've told me it's the biggest priority, it's the biggest cost to Kiwis, it's the biggest problem. Here are our two solutions. You can't tell me what impact those solutions will have. You can't tell me how much they'll reduce rents by, and you haven't even had the numbers checked by an economist.
What I can tell you, Ryan, is we've got a big cost of living challenge in this country. And if you zoom back out and say, why is it happening? It's because we've got a government that's let inflation get away. We have the second highest level of inflation after the US. And, if you start to look at it, housing's, a third more expensive here in New Zealand than it is in Australia. Incomes are about the same. And the cost of living is almost half in Australia from what it is here in New Zealand. So if we don't get these things sorted and we don't get inflation under control, and the way we do that is, yes, there's going to be higher interest rates. There's going to need to be a much better control of government spending. The OECD is saying that to New Zealand already. We've been saying that to the government for some time. And the third thing you've got to do is you've got to drive into creating more productive, policy for small businesses, which is actually what helps get us through this crisis.
All right, Chris, we have to leave it there, but I'm sure we'll have many more discussions about this in the weeks and months ahead. The National Party leader, Christopher Luxon, with us this morning.